Thanks for watching. Please remember to hit subscribe and please consider supporting independent journalism by going to patreon.com/HermelaTV and becoming a member. Thank you so much for your support. So, another thing that's different about Kenyan politics is William Ruto, the current president-elect, was a deputy president since 2013, but Raila Odinga is also not a stranger to high positions. He was prime minister, or was it deputy prime minister under Kenyatta at that point. What's the difference between president and prime minister in Kenyatta? Because it seems different in every African country. Which one has the most power? Which one's more symbolic?
So the president is definitely the most powerful in Kenya, and we have a presidential system. Raila Odinga was prime minister under Kibaki. He went up against Kibaki in 2007 and lost that election and went out there and caused havoc. And that led to the worst post-election violence in Kenya. And I guess this is a good place to talk about the history that I've sort of alluded to earlier. So he caused this havoc. It led to the worst post-election violence, over 1,200 people dead. And the UN came in, they mediated a peace, and they pushed Kibaki to somehow bring him on board the government in some type of a role that suggested some type of co-presidency. And they settled at a prime minister's position that actually gave him a certain amount of power. He was in the executive. He wasn't, it wasn't the way, for example, the French president has a lot of power and then his prime minister, or the prime minister, not necessarily his prime minister, the prime minister sort of just heads government business. His was a relatively senior executive prime ministerial position that had ample strength, almost as much as the president, and definitely above the vice president. So, for example, Kalonzo Musyoka was the vice president at the time, and Kalonzo Musyoka is another figure that has always stood by Raila's side and has been Raila's running mate for a couple of elections in 2013 and 2017. He was Kibaki's vice president at the time, but he had very little visibility because the prime minister's position was essentially more senior than the vice president. So he was essentially rewarded for his bad behavior. And I wrote an article back then where I said that if this went through, if Raila Odinga was awarded for his bad behavior, then his bad behavior was never going to end. And he was going to continue causing havoc during every election cycle so that he could be rewarded. And that's exactly what happened in 2007. In 2013, he behaved badly again. And the West always comes to his aid. They always write very positive stories about him. And in 2017, he got rewarded again, even after he caused havoc again, caused death and destruction. He caused death and destruction in 2007, over 1,200 people dead. In 2013, over 100 people dead. In 2017, I don't know how many people dead, but a substantial number. And then he got rewarded by Uhuru Kenyatta with a handshake that essentially gave him a motorcade, even though he didn't have any actual position in government. He got a presidential motorcade. He got, it would appear, a lot of government-funded privileges. And he was appointed as an AU ambassador. I don't know whether it's by the AU or by the Kenya government. I'm not actually clear. I'm not terribly interested in Raila's, personality, to be honest. So I haven't paid attention to what but he's I think it's a position that has been appointed by the AU. He's the AU emissary or ambassador for infrastructure, or some type of a title. You can research it. But anyway, his death and destruction, his shenanigans that have caused death and destruction go back all the way, as I said earlier, to 1969, when he orchestrated this stoning of the presidential motorcade that led to people dying in his own region. That, I think, was the beginning of Raila's hatred and inculcating of hatred within his region for the region from which President Kenyatta, the late Jomo Kenyatta, comes from, and his son, obviously, Uhuru Kenyatta, also comes from central Kenya, the Kikuyu community. And in 1982, when he attempted the coup against Moi after Kenyatta's death, again, over 600 people died. Odinga was arrested, went to jail because of his attempted coup. And frankly, the only reason he was not hanged for treason was because he was the son of the former vice president. And so, that saved him. And it's so insane to me that Kenyan media refuses to interrogate, refuses to even talk about this history, pretends that he went to jail for fighting for multi-party democracy. The person who actually suffered the most for Kenya's multi-party democracy is a man known as Kenneth Matiba. He was a member of parliament at the time who got really badly beaten and actually eventually led to, his fight against Moi led to Moi finally acquiescing to a weakening, to a diluting of the constitution or the constitutional powers that he had, essentially created around himself to strengthen the presidency. So a lot of Kenyan media collusion with Western media, with civil society, whom I call uncivil society. Civil society in Kenya is purely an extension of the CIA. They're funded by people like the Brookings Institution, the International Republican Institute, the International Democratic Institute, CIA front organizations that fund Kenyan civil society and civil society. And so they have backed RAILA unquestioningly for decades, and Kenyan media has picked up from where uncivil society ends. And I don't know whether that collusion has just happened organically, or whether Kenyan media recognizes that because the West likes this guy via, the instructions that seem to come quite directly from civil society, or rather by judging by taking the temperature of the tone from civil society. I don't know whether that's what Kenyan media picks up on. It's really strange. It's a really strange relationship, symbiotic relationship.
Kind of jumbled in together. I mean, I doubt that anything is, coincidental. There's a lot of ways to make that look like it is seamless. And as if agriculture is your passion, media is definitely mine. And there's actually a question about media and Kenya media in here. So I want to talk about sort of starting with this idea that there could be violence because this election is contested by some folks. And we've learned that you've got to take some of what's in the Western media with a grain of salt, but it's not to say there isn't some truth in it. So there was word, it looks like it is cooling down a little bit, that there's concern that there's going to be violence erupting because of the competitive nature of these elections. Where does that stand? Does it look like things have calmed down and that they're going to stay calm?
As I pointed out earlier, even his own supporters are tired of him crying wolf. He's like the kid that's cried wolf. And I've heard his own supporters saying, 25 years, man, like, just go home. Like, we have a new president. Our kids have stayed at home because, we use schools for elections, right? So people want their kids to go back to school. People want the economy to start running again. And people are tired of going on the streets for him. So the noises coming from his supporters are, nah, not this time. You go hire your lawyers, go to the Supreme Court. If you win, good for you. If you don't, go home. So
yeah, a
honestly,
lot of what Western media was showing looked like it was celebration, crowds celebrating. I don't remember seeing much in terms of violence, but it gave that sense that chaos,
well, there is definitely Western media that has shared posts from earlier post-election violence or earlier scenes of demonstrations claiming that there are protests in the usual regions where this happens, in Kibera, his constituency, and as well as his home town. I don't know if it's actually his hometown. It's a sort of a slum area in the region he's from called Kondele. But one of the images that I saw looked like it was actually taken in a completely different part of the country. On one of the superhighways that has been recently constructed. And so, Western media desperation, usual tactics.
An interesting analysis to do, just in terms of, because just on the surface, you can't, especially someone who's not very familiar with Kenya, you can't tell whether this was last election in Kenya, not in Kenya, in the city, not in the city. And as someone that's worked in media, I know that sometimes it's either a matter of not caring, not having the time. You just pull video that looks like it's people out in the streets, and it doesn't always matter, at least when it comes to covering African countries, whether it's from the current election cycle or not. So we'd be interested to see if we could get some information on that. Okay, a question on the media in Kenya. This appears to be very specific. So Wedi Asmat seems to know some things. Let's hear what you think, Karanja. So Wedi says, ask him why is Kenya the base of all fake news entities like Sahan, C2FC? Does the country even know about them and their harm in the HOA?
So the short answer is, unfortunately, the country is not aware of these entities. They are not aware of the harm that these entities are causing. That's just the simple truth. Why? Because Kenyans are not informing themselves about what is happening with our neighbors. Why? Because that's generally the way we Africans relate to each other, right? We don't really relate to each other. Everybody now has Twitter, Instagram, the internet, essentially. And so you have a choice of interacting with which news you want to interact with. And Kenyans generally are interacting with American news, and maybe a little bit of British, European news. And Kenyans are very westward looking. They're looking at the United States. I mean, I often joke about this, that Kenyans think that they're the 51st state. And it's not unique to Kenya. I mean, you see that in Nigeria as well. So unfortunately, Kenyans do not know about this. I honestly don't know how we even raise awareness for Kenya, to the Kenyan community, to the Kenyan population about this, because even when I've raised concerns that would, from my fellow movement organizers to my fellow Kenyans, about Kenyans' involvement in allowing our military, for example, to be used in Somalia, for AMISOM. Like, Kenyans are like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Like, our troops are keeping us safe from Al-Shabaab. Like, they have no understanding. They consume, when it comes to media about our neighbors, about our fellow Africans, they consume Western media. There's very little reporting from our own channels. And it's not because they don't have the resources. Like, Citizen TV is the second biggest media station in Africa after South African Broadcasting. They have the resources to have correspondence across the African continent. It's just not what Kenyans are interested in. We see the same thing in Nigeria. Like, we don't have Nigerian media in any of the other African countries, despite the fact that I'm pretty sure that they have pretty big channels. But Citizen TV really is a very professional channel. They have the resources. There's just not that interest. So I really don't know how we raise interest or information about that, because it is... I was in a Kenyan space one time, and I raised the issue of our military being in Somalia, and expressed the fact that this causes insecurity for Kenya, because when our Somali brothers and sisters confuse or fail to understand what our military is doing there, and then we get attacked by Al-Shabaab, and Al-Shabaab, what they do is cause chaos, right? Like the likes of Al-Shabaab, the likes of TPLF, what they do is cause chaos, and they will build on the population's misunderstanding or the population's sort of grievances. Somali people being unhappy about the presence of these types of media in Kenya, for example, or Ethiopians or what have you, Al-Shabaab will use that to cause division between the two countries, right? Because this is what they do. This is why the United States, this is why Western and South African, by the way, mercenaries use the likes of these organizations to destabilize. And so it's very easy to destabilize when people are not informed. I would wish to be able to push for a return home of KDF forces from Somalia. It would be a gesture of peace. So anyway, the short answer again is no. I'm hopeful that RUTO, especially given overtures from Farmajo to RUTO, that there would be conversations about this type of thing that would lead to Kenyan forces coming home. And I'm really, really hopeful of that. And I think that Farmajo's overtures to RUTO, to me, suggest that either there's an existing relationship, or at the very least, Farmajo understands that RUTO is a more likely ally. I don't think RAILA would have been even interested, right? RAILA is more likely to ally himself with the West choice, who is the current president. I don't even know his name. I don't care to know it, right?
Yeah,
in Somalia.
I think, I mean, it kind of made it clear in that comment, about his neighbors. One of the things that I did find as a interesting development was for Majo, the former president of Somalia, being one of the people that congratulated Ruto. But also maybe a little less surprising, but worth, I think, talking about is Museveni, the Ugandan president's son, also congratulated him. Is there anything we can glean from that?
I think what we can glean from that, if anything, is that people in power gravitate towards people in power. Museveni's son was just in Kenya meeting the current president, Uhuru. The current president, Uhuru, I understand. I don't know this with certainty. It's not something that I personally know independently, but I've heard it from spaces that I've attended talking about this from my Ugandan brothers and sisters, that Ruto was prevented from going to Uganda either by Museveni or by President Uhuru Kenyatta, whereas Raila was welcomed with the red carpet into Uganda. So then a few days later, like, Museveni's son is now, making overtures towards Ruto. I think it's really just, the regional strongmen seeking to make alliances in that case with the new guy. I also gathered from the space where that was being hosted by a Ugandan brother, and there were a lot of Ugandans talking about people from the whole region actually talking about the impact of this election on the region, who were talking about the fact that Museveni and Ruto are personal friends, to the point of even claiming that Museveni availed hundreds of acres of land to Ruto. The Ugandan people actually seem to not like the idea of Ruto as president. They feel that he's too close to Museveni, and therefore they think that does not portend well. They consider him, therefore, automatically as meaning that he is not a Democrat, that he would be undemocratic, that he would be similar to Museveni. I don't know this with any certainty, but I'm going to throw this out there, and God forbid if I get attacked for this. There's I don't know if we have Ugandans watching, but I really question Ugandans' opposition, the Ugandan population's opposition, or the people that I encounter on Twitter, their opposition to Museveni. I really question what it's built on, because I really question whether it is Western orchestrated, via civil society again, and Ugandan media. It's so easy, as we often talk about. This is a bit of a sort of
it's all related. Definitely, the audience is interested in stuff like this, because I think what we all just are curious is, okay, so are these leaders and the Horn, Central Africa, are they going to work with each other? Are they going to work with the outsiders and enemies? And Museveni going to continue down the road that he's been in, or if he has different kind of leadership in the region, is it going to get better for Ugandans, for people in the Congo, for people in Rwanda? I have heard that criticism of Ugandan opposition, that it looks like it's a political opposition and not so much a people's opposition. And because of that, there may be, or there it appears to be an indication that it is funded from the outside. So
I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that the Ugandan people are as opposed to Museveni as social media would have you believe, or the Ugandans on social media would have you believe. I am loath to be one to talk about any other country with authority, especially opposing people from that country. And so I'm very hesitant on this, which is why I sort of, made my little disclaimer, if it can be called a disclaimer. I'm just expressing a hunch. I have a feeling that because it's so easy to refer to any African leader as a corrupt African leader, as a dictator, they're just, I think if you ever look up the word African leader, the words that go with African leader more than any other thing is corrupt African leader, right? Or dictator African leader. Like, it's so easy. If I became president of Kenya today and people started calling me dictator Karanja, like, it doesn't matter that I'm an activist. Like, right. It just flies, right?
Yeah.
There needs to be no evidence, right? Because Western media just throws these words so easily. And I can't help thinking that the opposition to Museveni is really Western driven. And I do not believe that Bobby Wine has had the votes to actually win. Museveni has his support base, and there's just more of them. And the opposition is actually really badly organized, just like Raila Odinga. He's really disorganized, by the way. His campaign was total disarray, and they trusted. And this is another, I'm sorry, I'm going it's round and round in so many circles.
It's all related. No, please.
I'll bring it back.
Yeah.
I'll say this, like, there was such a disarray. And this is another thing that makes me think that President Uhuru Kenyatta really just brought him in the fold to manage him. President Uhuru Kenyatta convinced Raila and his whole coalition and all the politicians around him that the deep state was going to win it for Raila Odinga. So guess what? They were lazy. And they'll admit that too. They're admitting that they were outsmarted, that the Kenya Kwanza, the RUTO's alliance was just much better organized. They're admitting that. And they were in disarray. His campaigns have always been in disarray, quite frankly. He's badly organized. And all he's good at is this communication style, which is very Trumpian, by the way, which he's, and he's trained, he gets free training from the International Republican Institute and people like the Brookings Institution, many, like I said, CIA-fronted organizations, similar to Bobby Wine, similar to is it Chimasa or I can never remember these uninteresting foreign puppets, Chamisa in Zimbabwe of the CCC. All of them, their playbook is lazy, just like imperialism is lazy. Their playbooks are also lazy, and they all make a lot of noise, and they all have a lot of social media following. And I really suspect that Bobby Wine is, same thing. I'm not convinced that he has enough opposition, enough support to oust Museveni. And they keep crying they keep crying wolf, just like Raila. And I'm not saying that I support African strongmen. By all means, I'm not suggesting that I know or understand internal Ugandan politics or Museveni or the extent of Museveni's whatever it is that he's accused of, which quite frankly is a little bit unclear. But
we'll definitely have some folks from Uganda, or hope to at some point. I mean, I've heard a lot of what you're saying, I've heard corroborated from other people, but I am curious actually, because you're right. Museveni is one of those figures that even people that I've talked to that are very familiar with him have, mixed reviews on the way that he operates.
Well, let me just say one more thing before we move on from that, which is just like what I'm saying, activists like you and I, if we became president of Kenya and Ethiopia, what a day, right? Museveni came into
Oh, don't wish
power.
that kind of thing on me.
I know, right? Museveni came into power, hailed as this savior from the dictator. I think it was Obote that he ousted, and he was a hero at the time. But again, African heroes quickly turn into dictators because it's so easy to pin that label on. Part of the reason why I raise my suspicions about Museveni's popularity really stem from the fact that he really has been very vocal and very effective in terms of speaking up against the West, and sort of he was very effective around COVID. He really was very competent around COVID, and it made me question whether that doesn't give him a certain support base in Uganda, because his competence flew in the face of the accusations that I've heard thrown about him being incompetent and somebody who has no support. And I had also read somewhere that the level of support that he had was really quite overwhelming. So I can't help thinking that it's a very similar situation like Kenya, where you have this very loud opposition to government and anything government, and this knee-jerk support for anybody who's in opposition.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, I've also heard some pretty horrible accusations, so that have a lot of legs. But we'll definitely get to that conversation a different time. So, in general, as you know, a lot of the audience is from the Horn of Africa. Do you have a sense of the relationship between Kenya and Ethiopia, Kenya and Eritrea? We've talked a little bit about Somalia, but happy to hear more about that relationship. Also, we've seen President Hassan, the former president that was there when the TPLF in Ethiopia were leading, now back into his position. So what's the sense of the power dynamics now with Ruto, and how may he be different or the same as outgoing President Kenyatta?
You mean in terms of a relationship with the Horn?
Relationship with the Horn, and the allies, and how it relates to the allyship with the West as well.
Well, I'm inclined to believe that, first of all, Kenyan foreign policy is not going to change drastically. He is going to continue on whatever trajectory has been started in terms of expansion of the East African region and consolidation of the East African region. We are set to have a single currency. I gather that the East African region has invited Somalia to join. And so I think the status quo of not being confrontational with fellow African leaders will probably continue. So even with President Hassan, I would imagine that the relationship would be cordial. I can't help thinking that Ruto, as informed as he is, would be more likely to be more of an ally to Farmajo and to Abiy Ahmed, and to sort of continue to advance the sort of African solutions, even though Ruto is not a confrontational person. So I don't think he would be in direct confrontation. He wouldn't do anything to be in direct confrontation with the West. And also, they happen to have these nuclear weapons, right? So it's probably also wise. But he wouldn't be in direct confrontation. But I think he would make overtures to the likes of Farmajo, to the likes of Abiy Ahmed. He will subtly indicate to people like these that he wants to strengthen the region and sort of reduce dependence from outside. And I think the beginning of that is food security via agriculture. So I think, similar to really my approach, because that's one of the reasons why I focus so much on agriculture and food security. I think that he would focus on an area like that could easily sort of flow under the radar, right? Like agriculture doesn't seem that dangerous when as a tool of resistance, I think. Although of course we the CIA have ears and eyes everywhere, they recognize that food security is an essential part of national security, and so they do seek to destabilize that. And So, you know, it would be challenging, but I would be inclined to believe that he would start off alliances with something that seemed benign like that.
Right. Yeah. It seems benign until you get to a certain point.
Exactly.
And then it's hold on. Thanks for watching. Please remember to hit subscribe and please consider supporting independent journalism by going to patreon.com/HermelaTV and becoming a member. Thank you so much for your support.